but indoor temperatures, right? The built environment, the standard temperature is based on the temperature that's comfortable for a man in a business suit.
Yes. Oh my gosh. It was back in the 70s, I think. I know
Yep.
this stat. And I would sit there in the night in the cold studio because I worked
Yeah.
out of the studio and it would be freezing. And year after year, I'd be sending emails as the weather shifted to our engineering department. I am freezing back here. My teeth are chattering. Like, you need to do something. And it took a while for them to take it seriously, but eventually our chief engineer gifted me a space heater.
Nice.
I was like, "Thank you very much."
Here's what you get because you're not 200 pounds in a business suit.
Yes, yes, exactly, and
Hello, and welcome to the Scientista podcast, where women in science rule. This podcast is all about supporting powerful women who lead with their brains. I'm behavioral scientist Dr. Shata Chakraborty.
And I'm former Assistant Secretary of State Monica Medina. The Scientista podcast brings you conversations with leaders, changemakers, and cultural figures, sharing how they're turning facts and evidence into real world impact. So let's dive into today's podcast. We are so excited to have joining us today Amber Sullins. Amber is the Chief Meteorologist of ABC News and News 15 in Phoenix. She has won a number of Emmys for her work on local and national weather programs covering heat and flooding and everything in between in the southwestern U.S. and around the country. She's one of this country's best educators and communicators when it comes to explaining the science of extreme weather and climate change. So, Amber, welcome. We're so excited to have you.
thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and share more about, what's happening as we communicate climate in Arizona.
It's great. You definitely are experiencing it there, and we'll definitely talk about that. You've spent your whole career helping Arizonans understand and prepare for some of the most extreme weather in the country. But tell us how you got to that place where that's what you wanted to do. What sparked your interest in meteorology and your passion that's kept you engaged and wanting to be doing this all these years later?
Yeah, well, I grew up here in the Phoenix metro area, born and raised. And growing up, of course, I dealt with a lot of heat and I dealt with our monsoon season, which we have each summer as the winds shift. And so we'd see these incredibly hot days. And then all of a sudden, these storm clouds would start building. And I'd look and go, why is that one shaped like that? What's going on over there? And just all those curiosity questions about the why behind the weather I was seeing. That's what got me interested in meteorology. It still interests me to this day. I look outside and I go, okay, well, that cloud over there means this. So now I know what is happening with the weather, but it started with wondering what was going on.
I never really thought of Phoenix, Arizona and Calcutta, India as so similar, which is where I'm from many summers. And we have extreme heat too. But for you in Phoenix, you of course experienced heat firsthand and you realized how dangerous it could be. I mean, because of where you are, the unique location of where you are doing your meteorology in the United States, Phoenix, and what you just described, that's also playing into why you find it essential to make the connection between climate change and reporting on the weather. You're really well positioned for it. Well, you're interested in, obviously, you're a brilliant communicator. But in addition to that, the unique location you're in, it just sounds like a great example of how these climate change and weather are linked. And it's an opportunity to really reach the public with that understanding, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Phoenix, Arizona is a hotbed for the changes that climate change is bringing in our weather.
It's a
It's
good
not
microcosm.
and you know what? I have this conversation all the time with my viewers. There are a lot of people that still don't believe that humans are causing climate change. But in Arizona, they know it's getting hotter. So they're attributing it entirely to the urban heat island effect, which is a major, major player in all of this. So I always use like the old improv line. Yes, urban heat island effect. And yes, and because it's these
Right.
two things happening at the same time. So again, that's why Arizona, Phoenix in particular, is a perfect example of how humans are altering the climate, both through greenhouse gas emissions and through the building up of our urban heat islands.
Yeah, it's interesting that they don't consider building the urban areas up and all that hardscape as being human caused. But
No.
it's not the same as greenhouse gas emissions. It's a different way of causing it. And heat, is something that Arizonans have been accustomed to dealing with for a long time. Talk about how the rest of the country, which is now seeing a lot of the same kind of heat, how can we learn from Phoenix, and what are you doing to help educate the public about the danger of heat?
Yeah, I think that's it. The danger of heat and what we're seeing now in Arizona as the record keeping for heat related deaths improves is that those numbers have been grossly undercounted across the
Yeah.
country forever and still are in a lot of
And around the
cases
world too.
and
I mean,
around the
in
world.
Europe this summer,
Yes, absolutely. So, for example, if you go on, NOAA's website and look at the amount of deaths attributed to tornadoes, hurricanes, heat, etc., you'll see a number across the country somewhere on the order of maybe 1 to 200. But in Maricopa County alone, we know we've had more than 500 heat-related deaths over the last couple of years. And we also have investigators that work at ABC 15 that are looking into unaccounted heat deaths because there's a transient heat death list for people experiencing homelessness, and sometimes those deaths are not counted as heat
Sure.
deaths. So, that's kind of what we're doing. We're looking at the heat death numbers. We're trying to communicate how dangerous this is. And then we're diving into how we can make the accounting of heat related deaths better. So, again, Maricopa County is kind of on the forefront. I do think they're doing it better than anywhere else in the country, but we've got to get a standard model
yeah.
and some standard procedures that are used across the United States and maybe even around the world so that we get a better accounting as to how deadly heat is because it is the silent killer. It doesn't get all of the national attention that a hurricane would or tornadoes would. But it's killing more people than all of those other weather related phenomena combined.
So I have my explanation for why that's the case as a behavioral scientist. I assume you're going to say very similar things, if not exactly the same thing. So we have to ask, from your vantage point, why isn't it getting the attention it deserves? So can you talk to us about why heat in particular is one of those real risks that go understated or unless attention is brought to it? Why is that?
I mean, from a television perspective, it doesn't provide the visuals that would send a bell off in people's head to go, hey, this is dangerous, right? I mean, you show video of a hurricane moving in, the trees whipping around, or a tornado moving through, and the buildings destroyed, and people see that and they go, oh my God, like that's
Right.
awful. Like this is dangerous stuff. But what do you do for heat? You show video of people walking down the street sweating, and, especially here in Arizona where heat is common, that's everyday stuff for a lot of folks, especially the native Arizonans who have kind of built up this, I guess, this reputation of, this is heat, deal with it. This is how we live here, like kind of like the tough guy
Right.
mentality. Like this is us. If you don't like it, get out. But, the heat's getting worse. And I do think that people are not aware of how dangerous it can be until it's too late. And we see that time and time again when we have people on our hiking trails and they think it's no big deal. And the next thing you know, within 30 seconds or a minute, they go from feeling all right to feeling like they're going to pass out and die. And now we got to set up the chopper and go rescue them. So, I mean, that's just my perspective. You can probably sum it up a little bit more sciency and
Yeah,
with the
no.
research to back you up. But anecdotally, that's what I see
Yeah.
here.
And that was it. I mean, that's hitting the nail on the head. It's invisible and it's familiar. And you have Arizonians that are resilient and proud. And so it is just because it is familiar, just not enough risk is attributed to it until it's too late, like you described. And at that point, it becomes a cost for everybody, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely, and people,
that's what
there's
we need
been
to
there's
communicate.
been talks here. We have what's called a stupid motorist law, where if you, during a monsoon storm and a road is flooded out, if there's signage that says, "Don't cross this," and you cross this and have to get rescued, then you might have to pay for your rescue. Now, they don't enforce it as much as,
Mm.
that you would think they do because they don't want people to not call for help, but we do have
Right.
this thing on the books, and there's been talk about should we have a stupid hiker law where if, you know, the trails are closed on extreme heat day and people go hiking anyway and need to be rescued, should they have to pay for their rescue? Because it's not just them putting themselves at risk, they're putting everyone at risk that has to go up
Exactly.
these mountains and rescue them.
Yeah, it's
So, you know,
amazing. It's amazing how much I think it's impacting people's activities that they would ordinarily think, "Oh yeah, I can do that." I mean, things like high school sports and these kids are playing football or soccer or whatever. Talk about that and the heat dome effect. You mentioned that before, kind of the stuckness of these systems.
yeah, you know, Monica, this is hit now something very close to home. My son is a freshman. He's a football player. They have practice in the afternoon, 3 days a week from 4 to 6 p.m. during the hottest time of the day. And you
And
know,
it makes
we're
you
getting
worry as a mom.
yes, as a mom and as a meteorologist, because I see the data, I'm looking at it every day and I'm stressing about it. Also knowing that, you know, I can't get too involved because I don't want, you know, him to suffer the consequences of, oh, your mom,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
is the reason we can't
That's the
have
bigger
practice
risk for high
today.
school students.
Exactly. I don't want to do that. But I do think something's got to give because we are seeing in Arizona too many days where it is just too hot to be outside in the afternoon doing these practices. And so, what is that going to look like? I don't know moving forward, but, you know, I've floated the idea to many people. Why do we have to have football season in the fall in Arizona? Could we maybe switch other than tradition? Is there any other reason why we have to do this? Could we maybe switch basketball and football seasons here in these hottest places because basketball is played indoors and can we play football, you know, in the
In the
winter?
winter.
Other than tradition, I don't see another reason, but you know, maybe I don't know the whole story. I do think that that off of the out of the box type solutions like that need to be looked at in the future because it's not going to get cooler here.
Yeah. I'm gonna
It's
ask
only getting hotter.
I'm going to ask you to dive into that a little bit more. You are coming up with some great ideas. Give us some more ideas. What's working and what's not from all the work you've done in this space? What is working, especially when it comes to translating some of this complex science into information that people can understand, that they can actually process and then act on, right? Ultimately, the goal is for people to keep themselves safe, their families safe, their communities safe, and that's a big responsibility on somebody in your position because you're trusted. You're in people's living rooms every day. You are the scientist that engages with a public on more than any other science profession. So, how do you take that responsibility and what are you finding works and what are you finding doesn't work?
I think probably the biggest thing that I can do is open a dialogue and open these conversations because I don't have a magic wand. I can't change something myself, but I can shine a light on these issues and then hopefully people in the community that have the power to make changes, societal changes, can act on that. So my number one goal is to A, share the data and then B, put it into context, and then C, talk about the impacts on people, pets, our daily way of life. And so that's kind of how I approach it. But I do think that there's a huge need for people in the community to come together to make big changes as we go further into a world where our climate is changing and we can no longer operate the way that we used to. When I was growing up here in Arizona, it was hot. There were 110-degree days, but our urban heat island was much smaller. We cooled off every night. So you only had to
Yeah.
survive 3 or 4 hours in the afternoon. And we did that by jumping in the pool or staying inside and playing video games. But now we're getting into 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for 4 months out of the year. Absolutely punishing heat that is killing hundreds of people here in the Phoenix metro area. So we have to now think about how we're going to continue to work and play sports and live in an environment like that. And it's only going to be possible if we think about outside the box ideas on how to stay safe, how to keep our kids safe, how to work in these conditions. I mean, it is everything from the UPS drivers that don't have air
Yeah.
conditioning in their vehicles to the people
Construction
working
workers.
construction workers, the people working the tarmacs at Sky Harbor Airport that have to, you know, bring food to the planes and carry the luggage and it is 118 degrees out there. And even after the sun goes down, overnight lows are in the 90s. I mean, this year, everyone around Phoenix is going, this summer hasn't been too bad. There's this collective thought of, wow, this summer's a real blessing. And the only reason people have that is because last summer we had 70 days at 110 degrees or hotter. It was
70 days at
70.
110.
The
70.
goalpost has shifted.
The 30-year average is 21. We did 70 last year. So now everybody's recency bias says this summer is not too bad, when in fact, this summer is already fourth on the list for the most 110-degree days and fourth on the list for the most 90-degree lows.
And I mean, those overnight lows never getting down into the 80s, that's a huge difference. That is why the temperature average keeps going up. It's not just the daytime temperatures, it's the overnight temperatures.
Yeah. It's both. And people will argue, well, stop keeping track of the records at Sky Harbor because that's the hottest spot. And while it can be one of the hottest spots overnight because the outlying areas will cool faster, there are a lot of historical reasons why we need to keep the thermometer in the
Records.
same place, the records in the same place. And it also negates the fact that people do live around that area. There are hundreds of thousands of people that are experiencing these temperatures. And so moving the thermometer is not the solution.
Yeah, it doesn't change the fact that it's really
Yeah.
hot in those places. And I
And the
love that.
outlying areas may not be hitting 90, but we do have records that go back decades that show those areas are warming up too.
And if we ignore the facts, we will, rue the day and we won't understand what's really happening. And I love that you mentioned pets. My dog walker always says it's those pavements, those hot pavements on paws are
Yeah.
really hard on dogs and other, pets. So thanks for mentioning that too.
Yeah, it's brutal. And you know what? Because of the drought, a lot of people in Arizona have replaced their grass with fake turf. And the temperatures on the fake turf are insane. I
Yeah.
mean, you're talking about surface temperatures over 200 degrees sometimes
Oh
on
my
the fake
gosh.
turf.
Our poor doggy.
Yeah, and I mean, we have done stories of people too. There was a gentleman here in Phoenix that we profiled on ABC 15, I believe it was last year, and he had fallen and just put his arm on the pavement around his pool, that deck around his pool, and had burns all over
Wow.
I mean, you should see the burn numbers in the hospitals here in Arizona. Surface
Yeah,
burns,
burns, not just
real
sunburns, but burns from the hot
burns where
pavement.
you're burning your skin because you're touching the pavement or the metal park bench or the whatever it may be.
So tell us a little bit about being a female meteorologist. It's still kind of a man's world. I can definitely relate to, my NOAA experience. And, I think back about how many of the meteorologists were men. Talk about coming up in this field as a woman and how did you break through and what's been helpful to you in being so successful?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, when I started in this, like 20, 25 years ago, it was definitely male driven. It still is, although I will say in the past decade or so, I've seen a lot more females come up and female chief meteorologists come up. Because when I became a chief meteorologist at this station in Phoenix back in 2011, there were maybe a handful of us,
Yeah.
definitely less than 10 across the country, I would say, that were chief meteorologists that were females. So, we've seen some changes in that. I do think that there was a major hurdle to get over early on in terms of credibility because people would just look at me and assume that, I was just the weather chick and I didn't have the education to back up what I was telling them. And so I think it really made me develop a thick skin. It really made very conscious of what I was putting out there, especially on social media, because I didn't want to put anything out that would distract from the science and the information that I was trying to provide. And so I guess that's just how I've navigated it. I still run into instances where it's like this is a man's idea that was made by a man for a man, and how do I change that? But I do think I've gotten better about speaking up over the years of saying, "You know, I'm not gonna do that as a female, and here's why." And I think that's important to advocate for ourselves in that way.
You said that, and it just reminded me of because we're talking about weather. This is not exactly weather, but indoor temperatures, right? The built environment, the standard temperature is based on the temperature that's comfortable for a man in a business suit.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's
That's an
so funny.
example I
And
use.
it was back in the '70s, I think. I know this stat. And, I would sit there in the night in the cold studio because I worked
Yeah,
out of the studio and it would be freezing. And, year after year, I'd be sending emails as the weather shifted to our engineering department. I am freezing back here. My teeth are chattering. Like, you need to do something. And it took a while for them to take it seriously. But eventually, our chief engineer gifted me a space heater.
nice.
I was like, thank you very much.
Here's what you get because you're not 200 pounds in a business suit.
Yes, yes, exactly. And, female dresses are not very warm. And especially in Arizona, we go from these indoor spaces that are overly chilled to being outside and it's overly hot. And we're constantly going between these wild temperature swings. And, it's hard to dress appropriately for
Yeah,
that kind of
It
it's
stuff.
is.
reminding me
And
of
I think that is another thing we need to adapt better at. As the temperature gets hotter outside, we need to not make the extremes so great. It's hard.
Indoors. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that you can acclimate and yeah. Yeah, exactly. Because we go from tank tops outside to you'll see this in schools too. My daughter packs a sweatshirt in her backpack and it's 110. I'm like, "You're not gonna need that." She's like, "Mom, you don't know how cold it is in the classroom." I'm like, "Oh,
right.
well, there you go."
We can definitely understand, we can imagine.
Yeah.
So, you've had such an incredible career. For those that are listening that wouldn't have been able to see you on television, maybe they can Google some segments that really stand out. I know that there's some out there for sure, but tell us which ones to look out for. You've covered so many dramatic weather moments in your life. Is there any one that you wanna point our audience to kind of check out? And can you describe it for us? What was an extreme event that is just unforgettable for you, professionally or personally?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many. I think, probably the first one has stuck with me the longest, and this is when I was working in El Paso, Texas. So I'm not sure that there's any footage of this online, although we can Google it and try to find. But we had a storm, and at that point, I had only been working as a broadcast meteorologist for a year. And in that first year as a broadcast meteorologist, we had Hurricane Katrina. And then in Texas, in El Paso, Texas, we had what we later called Storm 2007. This was insane. It was a monsoon storm, but it just kept regenerating over the mountains and
Yeah.
it kept tracking over El Paso. And I remember I was on television. I was a morning meteorologist at that point. So I started on TV about 5 o'clock in the morning. I did not get off until about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, and that was only because then the chief meteorologist at the time came in and took over, but that was my first experience with wall-to-wall weather coverage. Had, a Blockbuster here's a blast from the past, Blockbuster Video got washed away, a KFC, I mean, we it was incredible to see, and, there's flooding everywhere, and it went from, "Wow, this storm is wild," to, "Oh my gosh, it's not gonna stop," to, "Oh no, now you have parts of downtown El Paso where we have graveyards and the graves are washing up." I mean, it went from wow to oh my God to this is an
To
absolute
awful.
catastrophe
Right.
in a
Yeah.
matter of like 5 or 6 hours. And that will always stick with me because it was the first time that we couldn't get off the air. That's how bad it was. You know, a storm is bad when you're on television and they will not let you go to commercial break. You are on the air talking for hours and hours and hours. And that was my first experience of that. And it's happened many times since with monsoon storms in El Paso and here in Arizona, where I've worked. But I think, as a young professional in my is at that point, that was the
Stands
first
out.
realization of like, oh my God, like the weather's not just fun and exciting. It can be truly awful.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I think that is an important thing for people to really get used to thinking about it that way. We think about our security in terms of national security but weather is increasingly dangerous and increasingly putting people in harm's way, people who wouldn't necessarily even have thought of it that way or who don't have the ability to sort of change their circumstances. Kids, I think about kids a lot in this instance. And so what you're doing is really helping so many people. And at a time when I think there is a lot of skepticism about climate change and where they're getting a lot of disinformation. So it's
Yeah.
wonderful that you're still speaking up and just being straight about it, not trying to preach or be political, but just give people the facts.
Yeah, but that too is becoming increasingly hard because people no longer accept facts.
We can do a whole nother episode on this.
We
Yeah,
can. Well, so
and
tell
so
us.
that makes the job so much more difficult now than it did back when I started talking about climate, because at least back then, 15 years ago, people accepted facts as facts. They accepted the data as data, and now we're in completely different territory.
Yeah. I mean, stuff like the weather modification insanity that, like, somehow the government is sending hurricanes towards certain people. It's
I mean,
crazy
it's just a lack of education in terms of, like, what's the energy load required to even do
to do
something like
that.
that? Are you kidding?
Yeah.
No, it's unfathomable.
This is why we have so much work to do. So,
Yeah.
Amber, we like to end with this question because we have a lot of young women and women of all ages on all different positions of their career trajectory, and they will really benefit from any advice you can provide. So, careers never really go according to plan, right? We haven't talked
Yeah.
to a single person yet so far that is like everything went exactly as I planned it to go. There's always curveballs. So can you tell us about a challenge that you faced, how you navigated it, what you learned from it, something that our listeners can take away?
Yeah, I mean, I think, those challenges come on a daily basis,
Mm.
and especially as a working mom. I have 2 kids. I have worked as a meteorologist on television their entire lives. And so there's constantly the balance between, doing your job and then doing your job as a parent. And I think that that's a universal struggle for working moms. And, there's not an easy solution out there, but I will just say, like, don't be too hard on yourselves. Do the best that you can, but also don't get distracted by the everyday nonsense that will come your way. Sometimes the best thing to do is not to do anything at all, but just to keep pushing forward, because a lot of the distractions and a lot of the things that will try to demoralize you and tear you down, they trouble's only for one night, joy comes in the morning kind of a thing. Just, keep pressing forward. It's going to be okay. Don't make any rash decisions. There are some days when I was working mom, it's too much. And if I could make a decision in that moment, it'd be like, I quit everything right now. You know,
We've
I
all
think
had that day.
we've all had that day, right? Like, I just can't take it anymore. I'm quitting everything right now. Go to bed.
Yeah,
And wake up the
that's
next
great.
morning, right? Like, wake up the next morning and you will surprisingly find peace in a lot of those instances. A lot of things just require a good night's sleep. I think I've learned that over
True.
the last 20 years.
Great advice. Great advice.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much, Amber, for this wonderful conversation. Thanks for sharing your experience about helping people understand the weather, especially extreme weather and climate change at this moment when we know we are up against it and we have to adapt, we have to change. If you liked this podcast, thank you for listening, and help others discover it by leaving us a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and tell a friend. We really need your support. We're trying to grow our audience, so share it widely.
And you can always find out more about us at scientista.world. So please check it out for more stories, updates, and ways to get involved.